free range in what you'd like, whatever ways I could possibly help to answer the things you'd like.
Thank you. So you're going to have to start with that amazing reel and a clip with just a few highlights of your career. And I'm sure you've seen it lots of times. Is there anything in there that always strikes a chord for you?
Well, I like that little mini, it's short, but it starts with Apocalypse Now and it ends with The Godfather, which I guess are the two films best known of my work. But I'm also pleased that it has a couple of very recent films that I did. In recent years, as you know, the movie business has changed and solidified, and that's something we can talk about. The studio business, the so-called Hollywood business, are very much what are franchise pictures of superheroes and their huge budgets. And for that reason, there has grown an exciting independent film adjunct where it's funny, the Hollywood films have too much money to work with and the independent films have too little, but it makes a very scrappy group of independent film directors of which Americans can be very proud of, a big long list of young people who really don't want to sell out and make films that are not personal to them. So there's also this independent film business that he mentioned. My granddaughter, Gia, made Palo Alto, which was a very inexpensive film, but was well received. By the way, she's the 5th generation of our family in the movie business. That's how long the movie business is. But so I'm pleased that it had Youth Without Youth. I don't know that you've seen any of those films, but these were recent films that I made just out of love and that I was able to finance myself. There were actually 3 of them, Youth Without Youth, or 2, and Tetro, which I made in Argentina. Now, people haven't really seen them because they're not part of the normal distribution chain, which is changing dramatically. That's something you might want to talk about, is what will the so-called cinema business be like in cinema art in 3 years? Because in another 3 years, it's going to be a totally different ballgame, as we say. So thank you for letting me show those less known films.
That's absolutely the kind of thing that we love to hear in Gartner audiences, so changing distribution models. But we have to ask first a few questions that everybody wants to know. For example, how you got interested, how you got started in filmmaking and screenwriting and directing.
Well, my father was a classical musician. He was the solo flute for the Toscanini NBC Symphony. You're all quite young here, but in the 30s, RCA, Mr. Sarnoff, who was the chairman of RCA, decided that he would recruit Arturo Toscanini, who was quite elderly. I think he was in the 70s at the time, but he was the world-famous maestro, to come to America and put together the greatest orchestra that could be recruited for the maestro. And that became known as the NBC Symphony, and it played concerts for the radio. In fact, it worked in Studio 8H, which was where Saturday Night Live now comes from. And it was considered, among the finest orchestras in the world. My father was the first flute, but my father wanted to be a composer, so he was frustrated with the instrument, and he later went on to become what he hoped for. But so I was in a family and his father had been a tool and die maker. In fact, his father was the man who built the Vitaphone, which was the machine that made movies talk. That first film, The Jazz Singer, with Eddie Cantor, I guess, Al Jolson. My grandfather engineered and built the Vitaphone, so that's the first generation that was in the movie business. But so I was surrounded with technology and the arts and music, and I was as a kid, I was a boy scientist. I was always tinkering and building things and down in the basement. And that ability, since we moved around a lot, every time I went to a school, I had no friends, I gravitated towards the theater department because that's where the girls were, and offered my ability as a boy scientist, and inevitably I got involved in doing the lighting and lights and theater technology. And while I was on a ladder hanging a light, I was watching the director, who was the faculty member, direct the students, and I thought, yeah, I can do that. And so from my interest in theater, which I got through the technology, I became a theater major in college, and then I wrote plays and directed many plays in school, and ultimately, later on, if you want, I could tell the story of how I first discovered the cinema. It was for me. And then I ended up, instead of going to the Yale Drama School, which was the place in the country for theater students, I went to UCLA Film School, and the rest was how I got into the film business.
Wow, so probably maybe we have more in common as information technology people with you than we ever imagined. The technology was one of the roads in for you. How about winemaking? Is the technology of that?
Well,